Okay, Future of English started with David Graddle's English Next book, which was published in
2006.
2006. So why did you think it was time to revisit that?
Well, he made those predictions for 15 years ahead. So it was written in 2006, so in 2021, it was actually Mike Solly gave a little talk somewhere about what seemed like an obvious topic of discussion, which was, here we are 15 years on from Graddle. And it sort of ignited as an idea. Because it was 15 years, it was the end of that period. We thought, let's take a detailed look at what he said and get an idea of how things have turned out. And then that developed into this idea of then making another set of predictions for the next decade.
In one of the predictions, that English teaching English as a foreign language, or EFL, will be an end to that. And you kind of said that that's underway.
Well, when EFL was the thing we were all doing, everybody was doing, everything's very top down. And I don't just mean national education policies. The EFL classroom was top down. Students did what the teacher said. I mean, we'd like to think we're all inclusive, but no. Now, 15 years on, and just going through the pandemic, things are beginning to move faster. The pandemic has been a huge catalyst for so much. And one of the things that I see is the rise of the learner and the learner's role in changing that EFL paradigm.
One of the most interesting areas is this idea of the move away from the native speaker norm. This myth that the ideal teacher is a native speaker and only English is spoken in the classroom, which is the way most of us were trained to teach. As an ignorant monoglot myself, I was taught only use English in the classroom, doesn't matter what language students speak. Graddle thought that was going to change, and that moved towards this more multilingual reality, because most people live multilingual lives. Most people have, there's all this talk about plurilingual competence that's coming through academia. That's just how most people actually live.
And Graddle writes about this in English Next. In EFL, the learner is always on the outside, wanting to get in, and their way to get in is the English language. Well, things are changing a little bit now because the learner knows what the learner wants to know. They know what their goals are. They know how to access them. And they still need English. But I think, in a strange way, the pandemic has given the learner a voice. And I think that will change paradigms in the classroom. I think it will change paradigms in policy as well. But that's just one tiny aspect of it.
There is an awareness and things are changing slowly, but really it hasn't happened to anywhere near the extent I think that he thought it would and probably should.
Do you think that's partly to do with education systems though, and reform, and the challenges of language teaching and learning in that way? I mean, if you think about the teacher education, the training, the resources that might be needed for a multilingual classroom, I mean, that's phenomenal.
There's been quite a lot of conceptualization of this idea within academia, but very little in the way of practical outputs. Because you're right, you can't just throw a teacher in the class and say, here you go, trans-language.
Exactly.
And yet, it's how many teachers in lots of schools all over the world actually operate, because they have to. That's the nature of how they teach. I mean, really, they should be telling us about this. We're still very top-down in this, aren't we? I mean, nowhere near bottom-up enough.
No, you're right.
For someone who was going, okay, multilingualism in a kind of in a nutshell, I know it's difficult to do, but sort of the basics of multilingualism, what is that and how is that empowering?
There are so many different contexts and there are so many different perspectives. So for me, multilingualism depends on who you're asking, in which context, because in some places multilingualism is recognised, and it's in society. In other places it isn't, and other languages are used under the table, so to speak.
I was on the tube to get to the plane to come over here for the conference. There were two young women sitting opposite me who were speaking Spanish. And then all of a sudden they weren't. They were speaking English with London accents. And then they were speaking Spanish again. And of course, if you're not listening to people, the brain takes, well, my brain certainly takes a while to actually work out what's going on. And that was absolutely what so many people in the world do without thinking about it. So we used to call code switching, although we're moving on, of course. We're inventing new technology now, so we can confuse people again. But this ability to just use the languages you have, and this is where translanguage, I think, is going to become interesting when we look at how it should be, how people apply it. It's just this ability to use what you've got. And I think what we're looking at here, or what we're beginning to think about, is how can you provide teachers and learners with what they need to take full advantage of what they have. They have this amazing linguistic ability, and we're sticking them in a classroom and not letting them use any of it in some contexts. And there's increasing amounts of evidence that that doesn't work anywhere near as well as allowing people to engage with the language and the languages they have. The question that we need to look at answering, that I think you're touching on, is how do you reach people who don't have the technology? How can technology help if they don't have it? And what we find interesting, a lot of the work we've been doing recently, we know people don't have computers, so you think, what's next? And it happened to a certain extent during COVID. How do we reach people where education systems have stopped? And we thought, well, television, great. And that, I mean, millions of kids ended up get educated through television. But then a lot of families don't have television. If you're lucky, one person in the village might have the telly, and he's probably watching something else when you need to do your lesson. So radio. Yes, but your mother's using the radio for this, and your father's using it for that, and it only gets to the girl in the house, the youngest girl at the bottom of the heap very much. And it's too late, it's not there. Mobile phones. Excellent. We think everyone has a mobile phone now, because you see television pictures of everyone with a mobile phone. But actually, in many villages, for example, you might find that the head of the village has the mobile phone, which again, it'll never get down to the kid who needs it for the learning. And the question, therefore, is what can we do? We're commissioning some research at the minute as part of a previous project that's looking at ultra-marginalised kids, kids who've fled war zones and have ended up in places they've never been. We're looking at slums in some countries, slum schools that have been set up by people who live in the slums to educate kids there. Really quite people whose voices never get heard, and looking at what aspects of technology they do and don't have, and how and what might be possible to try and improve their access to education. And that one project in particular would be very interesting to see how that comes, because we don't have, we know the question, how do you reach people? We talk in this presentation about technology, but it's not just technology, it's whatever it is, and we're not sure what the answer is yet.
In order to reach the optimum number of people in any given place, we're going to have to start working in partnerships. There's a lot of mention of the public sector working with the private sector, and we don't do it enough, and we don't do it well enough. So the public working with the private sector more effectively is one solution. It's not the solution, it's one solution. In our context, we are very reliant and very tunnel visioned on the internet and the Wi-Fi and our mobile phones. But some people don't have that. They only have radios, or they only have televisions, and one in the whole family, if that. How do we exploit that better? And that goes back to who has that device in that family. So for me, there's another EDI issue there. So one of the things that has come through all of the data is that EDI goes through everything, absolutely everything. There's no getting away from it. And I think in order to answer some of the biggest questions, we have to look at EDI first, I think.
Okay.